Ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome you. I'm Leon Botstein, I'm the president of the college, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this 10th anniversary conference of the Hannah Arendt Center. My role is entirely ceremonial. I will start first with, for those of you who are new here, to welcome all of you, especially the newcomers, and also to note that this is the largest conference we've had so far, and I'm pleased because it's not the most controversial subject. So it shows the intelligence of the audience, and that there are many students here from our early colleges in New York City, primarily Manhattan. One of the things that Bard is proudest of. And so I hope that 2 days fulfill your expectations. I also want to say for those of you who are new, which bears repeating, that we didn't actually steal the name of Hannah Arendt just because she was a distinguished intellectual and a rarity as a woman in her generation. So it was not simply an act of fashion. There is a real connection between Hannah Arendt and the college, as many of you know. Her husband taught here philosophy from 1951 to his retirement. She's buried here, and she left her library to the college. She also helped me get this job, so I'm president of Bard in part because of Hannah Arendt. She was a teacher of mine, and she conspired behind the scenes to persuade a very reluctant faculty to accept a 27-year-old as president of the college. And she was incredibly nice to me. For those of you who are Bard students, she was acted as my senior project advisor, my senior thesis advisor, and she stayed in touch with me and I with her. And one of my disappointments was that she promised me that she was going to retire from the new school at the end of the 1975-1976 academic year and start teaching at Bard part-time to help me out in the project of building the college up intellectually and as a public space. So the presence of a Hannah Arendt Center is not an arbitrary act of fame pursuit. I actually think she would be amazed at the reputation and the currency of her work and the existence of a Hannah Arendt Center. Even a coffee mug that would have actually delighted her, I think. When she died, she was a subject of a lot of critical appreciation. I think Isaiah Berlin was quoted as saying that she was the most overrated intellectual of her generation. But she will have the last laugh on Isaiah Berlin, in my view. So no one, not her students or people who knew her, ever anticipated the presence of Hannah Arendt streets, of the immense number of written works on her, both in English and in German. And it's a very pleasing aspect in an otherwise discouraging environment. I also want to say a few words about the person whose creation the Hannah Arendt Center is. When we recruited Roger Berkowitz as a political theorist, he had written a wonderful book on Leibniz, and he had the idea of creating this Hannah Arendt Center. I would have to say I was slightly skeptical to begin with, but I was proven wrong. It's 11 years in the making, and it has played an extraordinary role here on the campus and also beyond the campus. Roger is, in a way, the ideal person, a genuine person of ideas who thinks himself, not scared to write. It's one of the few institutions that makes good use of the internet. I think the Love of the World, the website that he created, is actually worth reading and looking at. He has brought incredible numbers of events. And unlike many people, he also, this I particularly admire, he's also not only has good ideas. Good ideas are not short in supply, but people have the capacity to make them happen, which includes the otherwise unpleasant business of raising money, which an institution like this, which is honestly poor, requires, unlike Harvard University that wouldn't really suffer by not raising money for quite a long time and actually distributing it to other universities and colleges. But that being said, it takes a lot of effort and commitment. He really believes in the plurality of ideas, which is rare. He has his own firm beliefs, but it doesn't crowd out others. And he has a genuine affection for the world with all its difficulties. It's not a selective affinity. And he really does believe that thinking and writing about what we care about is important. And one of our colleagues who's here today probably encapsulated Roger's contribution to the college best. Anne Lauterbach, our distinguished colleague and poet, said, Roger Berkowitz has been determined to activate and preserve Arendt's thinking and writing as relevant to the pressing questions of contemporary life and politics. He has brought together persons and ideas in conversation, unafraid of controversy, in the hopes that Arendt's profound engagement with the most difficult, contradictory, irresolute questions of our times can help us to better understand each other and our world. I think that is very well said. So please join me in congratulating Roger on his achievement. So my role is ceremonial, and most of the ceremony has been dispensed with, but I will not fail to seize the opportunity to say a few words about a subject I know nothing about, but as a citizen, I have some obligation to say something about. Politics is not my field, and I participate in it in the ways that are required of me, both as a public and a private person. And my experience is not only in this country, but in Hungary, where I'm chairman of the Central European University, its board. And Hannah Arendt herself had a lot to say about the Hungarian Revolution of 1956. And clearly it is a country that was part of her observation, not only in the 56, but also in writing The Origins and also the Eichmann in Jerusalem. So my reflections come particularly now when we are in the midst, the Central European University is in the midst of trying to find a resolution to the problem of existing as a free and open university in an authoritarian regime that actually has now developed a very strong, highly personalized, and unabashedly anti-Semitic and reminiscent attack on George Soros, the Hungarian Jewish philanthropist. And so the question of democracy and its crisis, particularly since Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary, is an extremely articulate exponent of a theory of illiberal democracy, which is basically the notion that through democracy, understood as a process by which we elect by large majoritarian rules, a political system or government or party whose purpose is to undo the traditional protections of what we might call liberal democracy, whether it be the rule of law, the protection of minorities, the openness of borders, the freedom of speech, the freedom of the media, and the independence of the judiciary, whatever you choose. And explicitly part of the agenda, popularly elected, not imposed through violent revolution, not a seizure of power, not a coup d'etat, but actually voluntarily introduced. And the argument against a liberal democracy, its secularism, its absence of a moral center, its hostility to myths of national tradition and unity, and there are many objections. And it trades on the anger of disaffected people who have found the promises, particularly by the bureaucracies of liberal democracy, have to have been broken, that the entrance to the European Union wasn't what it was supposed to be, that economic decline, stagnation, isolation, all these things occurred. Some of it is generational, but not all of it is generational. So in the government's attack, very cleverly veiled on the presence of a free university and a non-governmental university, it has done its homework and acts cleverly and politely. And so the question of the crisis of democracy, or the promise of democracy, has to be prefaced by the fact that it's deeply in trouble in many parts of the world. Hungary is not alone. In the United States, it doesn't bear repeating. It is tiresome. You have to read all of the extremely impassioned but not always enlightening rage that comes off the pages of the New York Times, a little too much, a little too late in the game. But here we are in the United States with a president and a government that is as frightening as could be imagined, and one of the interesting things about it is that it was not imagined. It is unimaginable on a daily basis. And it is the substitution of charisma for politics. Whatever one says about our president, that he is a genius, no one has ever dominated so consistently on a daily basis our public attention. And by so doing, he has reduced all discussion of politics, policies, to being boring. He's translated politics into the same scheme of evaluation as entertainment. And the entertainment, of course, is at our expense. The absence of political participation in this country is astonishing. Non-voting, as let's say in the Catalonian independence vote, non-voting is an act. And one can say the majority of our citizens don't vote. They won't vote in off-term elections. And what are the citizens saying to us? The perils of a mass democracy have been well known for a long time. But the fact remains is that the adage that we have the president we deserve may actually be right. What other president could one expect after the Citizens United case? What other president can we expect when we actually, on a state level, tolerate the level of gerrymandering that we have? And as the population continues to separate between urban and rural, how is this going to be fixed? It's not going to fix itself in a sudden spurt of enthusiasm in 2018 or 2020. The good news, of course, is that people report a tremendous growth of interest in local politics. The turnout in the Philadelphia mayoral election, people want to look at optimistic signs, and I'm prepared to be optimistic. No one would be a college president who was a pessimist. So you have to be an optimist about these matters. But if I had to identify one thing before I make a graceful exit, about the crisis of democracy, I would turn to Arendt's concept of the public realm, or Jürgen Habermas's version of that in a semi-historical way of public space. The real question that faces, among others, is it true that social networks and the internet provide a new and invigorating and extremely powerful and potentially progressive version of public space, and all the optimism about that? Is it justified? Now, to be critical of that is very awkward, especially for someone who is over the age of 30, because to criticize technological advances in their political implication is to look as if one might be a Luddite, you know. And one hates to be behind the times. Having been always behind the times my entire life, I was old when I was young, and so I never experienced youth, so I have no sense of loss. But I do find that just as the people who want to tell you that you can teach, in a sense, long distance, it's possible. Anton Bruckner learned counterpoint by sending in the mail his exercises to Simon Sechter in Vienna. This is not a new thought, and it's possible. Online education is a replacement for the traditional university. I like to say that people who think teaching in real time, in real space, can be replaced by some kind of distance learning. Yes, we have absorbed in the university technology with ease. Since the 12th century, if not earlier, and everything from the book to the telephone to video, technology is fantastic. All of us uses it. Everyone is attached to it. I praise it. I don't know how I'd live without it. I wouldn't criticize an undergraduate for her or his attachment to a cell phone, given my own attachment to my own cell phone. And I find myself falling into the same trap that everybody else does, spending a lot of time saying nothing, things I never said before, constantly, and awaiting their return, the same puerile response from a family member, a loved one, unnecessary. Yet I've become attached to it, and I don't have to remember anything anymore. I just look it up. And I do realize that I need to know what to look up. That's a little bit of a problem. But it is unbelievably useful in teaching and in learning. However, teaching cannot be replaced by distance learning. And I say somewhat provocatively, it's not politically correct, but in an Arendt conference I feel comfortable in doing so, that teaching is like sex. Technology improves it at the margins. And the basic transaction remains utterly the same. And so it is with teaching. When we turn to politics, I want to suggest that the crisis of democracy lays to some extent in having to come to realize that public space may need to be physical, not virtual. That the virtual use of politics will not result in a notion of democracy that bears a resemblance to what we would like to cherish, which is the notion of individual rights, the freedom of speech, concern for the truth, the ability to adjudicate the truth and for people to believe it, the willingness of people to compromise, sit in a room as in a negotiation and come to a decision, well, I didn't get 100% of what I wanted and you didn't get 100%, but we got enough that we can live with one another. You can't negotiate a union contract over the internet. You shouldn't be able to. That the actual negotiation and discourse and action that's required of politics requires a public space that breaks the isolation of virtualness. I'm not sure that the best of our natures, our self-censorship, the positive part of it. The internet is a place we can say things we used to think but thought better of about other people. We also were able to forget. When I insulted somebody on the telephone, I could say, well, you really misunderstood. I really didn't say that. Barring their having a tape recording, which was illegal, except in this state, it's something where you knew they actually said that terrible thing, but they allowed the human engagement of compromise to accept that you have thought better of it and now wanted to exit. But having it on my internet, on my email, on my text, I am reminded of the very first hour of insult, continually. So the virtual space requires some adjustment and some change, but I'm not sure it is a replacement for what Max Weber called the ethics of responsibility, for the ability to take one's place in a gray world with compromise and to actually take responsibility for acting on behalf of one's fellow citizens, both as a representative or a member of government or a bureaucracy or as a citizen in discussion. So I think the biggest crisis is our neglect of keeping the public spaces alive. One of the good things about the Charlottesville catastrophe was that it was about a physical space, about monuments that are in our presence, about the common place we occupy. The concern for the environment reminds us that we live in one physical world. So I think both our politics and our genuine capacity for intimacy is at stake when we neglect and sacrifice the public space and we permit no place, physical place, of the adjudication of ideas and the ability to distinguish fact from fiction, lies from truth, no matter how well dressed up those lies are. So we live in a very difficult time where the instrument of restoration, of a rational discourse about everything from science and particularly about politics is extremely difficult, and with the coming to agreement and making intelligent decisions and cultivating leadership is made very, very difficult by the very advances we have so eagerly and sometimes thoughtlessly embraced. That's my only thought on this matter, and I leave it to you and to the many distinguished guests and to Roger, who will start this conference off. And I hope you have a very productive 2 days. And again, welcome to Bard College.